when an arrogant billionaire mocked a simple janitor, saying, "If you can play this piano, I'll marry you." She never imagined she was about to face the biggest shock of her life. What happened that night changed everything forever, and you won't believe the ending of this story. The night was perfect. The luxurious hotel shone with its golden lights, reflecting on the polished marble of the main lobby. It was another charity gala Thursday evening, one of those the city's elite loved to attend. Men in tuxedos and women in expensive gowns filled the main hall, champagne glasses in hand, chatting quietly about business and trivialities. John Mitchell pushed his cleaning cart through the corridors adjacent to the hall, trying to be as discreet as possible. At 30 years old, he knew the routine of these events well. 5 years working at that hotel had taught him that to the elite, staff like him were practically invisible. And he preferred it that way. Fewer problems, less trouble. The cart creaked as he headed to the main hall. There were a few abandoned glasses on side tables to be cleared before the night's main speech. John adjusted his navy blue uniform, checked that everything was in place, and entered the room with careful steps. The hall was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting prisms of light over the round tables covered with impeccable white cloths. Arrangements of white and gold flowers decorated each table, and a small but elegant stage sat at the back. There, a black grand piano awaited the pianist who would perform later. John began his silent work, collecting empty glasses and ashtrays. The guests chatted animatedly, unaware of his presence. Exactly as he liked it. Discreet, efficient, invisible. Then she appeared. Victoria Collins entered the hall as if she owned the world, and in many ways, she did. At 30, she was the heiress of an empire including hotels, construction companies, and investments nationwide. Her blood-red dress contrasted with her dark hair, styled in a perfect bun. Diamonds sparkled on her neck and wrists, each piece worth more than a whole family's house. She was the main sponsor of the charity event that night. Her presence was not out of the kindness of her heart, but a social obligation. Appearances had to be maintained, and donating a few $1,000s was a small price for a good public image. John kept working, now more aware of the movements around him. Victoria walked among the guests with a calculated smile, greeting important people and posing for photos. Her voice echoed throughout the hall whenever she laughed, a loud, artificial sound that drew attention. "Darling, what a wonderful night," she said to a group of businessmen. "I hope everyone contributes generously. After all, we need to help the less fortunate, don't we?" John rolled his eyes inwardly. He knew this type of people well. They talked about charity while treating their own staff like trash. He continued collecting glasses, trying to finish his work quickly in that area. Then the inevitable happened. John was bending to pick up a glass that had rolled under a table when Victoria, gesturing excitedly in conversation, stepped back without looking. The impact was slight, but enough to tip the champagne glass she held. The golden liquid flew toward her expensive dress, staining the red silk with drops that looked like golden tears. "What the hell?" shouted Victoria, her face contorted with anger. The entire hall turned to look. "You incompetent! Look what you did!" John quickly stood up, heart racing. "Sorry, ma'am, it was an accident." "I was just—" "An accident?" she interrupted, her voice rising an octave. "You ruined my dress. Do you know how much this costs, you useless man?" Other guests started to gather, forming a circle around the two. Some discreetly took photos with their phones. John felt his face burn with shame. "Ma'am, I can pay for the cleaning," he tried to explain, knowing he didn't have enough money for even a piece of her dress. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was pure cruelty. "Pay with what money, darling?" "With your janitor salary." The guests' laughter echoed through the hall. John felt smaller and smaller, as if shrinking under all those judgmental eyes. "Did you see this?" Victoria addressed the other guests, theatrically expressing her indignation. "This man is living proof that some people are born to be invisible, to clean up other people's messes, not to be among real people." "Please, ma'am," John murmured, his voice almost disappearing. "Please what?" Victoria was clearly enjoying the situation. "Do you want me to pretend nothing happened? That people like you have the same worth as people like us?" Then her eyes gleamed with a malicious idea. She looked at the piano on the stage and then back at John. a cruel smile forming on her lips. "You know what?" she said, raising her voice so everyone could hear clearly. "If you can play that piano better than a professional pianist, I'll marry you." The hall burst into laughter. Victoria clapped her hands, delighted with her own joke. "Heard that, folks? The janitor's going to give us a show." John looked at the piano, then at Victoria, then at all the mocking faces around him. Something stirred inside him, a mixture of anger, humiliation, and nostalgia. "But of course you won't be able to," Victoria added. "People like you only know how to clean, not music, art, or culture. That's for people like us, with education and refinement." The guests agreed with murmurs of approval. Some were already turning away, considering the show over. But John kept looking at the piano. Victoria noticed his stillness and became even more irritated. "What? Lost your tongue or finally understood your place in this world?" John took a deep breath. For years, he had been the perfect employee, discreet, efficient, invisible. But now something inside him was screaming to come out, something he had buried long ago. "I accept," he said. His voice was low but clear. The hall fell silent for a moment. Victoria blinked as if she hadn't heard right. "What did you say?" John lifted his head, meeting her eyes for the first time that night. "I said I accept. I'll play the piano." Victoria's laughter rang through the hall like breaking glass. "Oh my God, he really believes he can. This is going to be even better than I thought." The silence that followed was deafening. John could hear his own heart pounding as hundreds of eyes fixed on him. Some guests had already pulled out their cell phones, ready to record what, in their opinion, would be an epic humiliation. Victoria couldn't stop laughing. "Guys, are you seeing this? He really thinks he can play." She turned to the friends who accompanied her. "Marianne, are you recording?" "This is going to go viral on social media." John swallowed hard. His hands were sweating and he discreetly wiped them on his pants. How long had it been since he last played piano? 5 years? 6? It felt like an eternity. Wait, Victoria said, raising her hand as if she had a brilliant idea. "How about we make this more interesting?" She opened her designer bag and pulled out a wallet stuffed with bills. $100 if you can play a whole song without mistakes. The guests murmured among themselves, some smiling maliciously. John knew it wasn't generosity, it was pure humiliation. Victoria was offering money as if he were a trained animal in a circus. $200, shouted someone from the crowd. A heavy-set businessman with a cigar in hand. $200 if he doesn't run away in the first 30 seconds. More laughter. John felt blood rush to his face, but not from shame. It was anger, an anger he hadn't felt in years since... "No," he said, his voice firmer now. "I don't want your money." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Oh no. Then what do you want? I already said I'll marry you if you play better than a professional, or would you prefer something more realistic?" "I just want you to keep your word," John replied, surprising himself with his own courage. The hall exploded with laughter again. Victoria was practically doubling over with laughter. "My word? You really think I'd marry you?" "That's what I said," John calmly replied in front of everyone. "My dear," Victoria said dryly, a tear of laughter streaming down her cheek. "That was a joke. I would never marry someone like you. But let's have some fun. Play your 3 notes. We'll take some Instagram photos, and then you can go back to your cleaning cart. How about that?" John started walking toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, like wading through thick water. The guests parted, creating a human corridor between him and the instrument. "Look, he's really going to try," Victoria said, delighting in the spectacle. "Someone tell the pianist we hired. He's going to want to see this." John stopped in front of the piano. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway Model D. The keys glittered under the chandelier's light, each one perfectly aligned. He reached out and gently touched the lid, feeling the polished wood under his fingers. "What are you waiting for?" Victoria taunted. "Divine inspiration." John turned to look at her for the first time. That night, his face was completely serious. "What piece would you like to hear?" The question surprised Victoria. She expected him to try some simple tune and embarrass himself. "What did you say?" I asked. "What would you like to hear?" John repeated in his strangely calm voice. Now Victoria exchanged looks with her friends. This wasn't going as she expected. The janitor was supposed to be shaking in fear, begging to get out of there. Instead, he seemed confident. "Anything," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Play a happy birthday song. That should be good enough." More laughter from the audience, but John didn't laugh. He just nodded and pulled out the piano bench. The leather was soft and well cared for. He adjusted his seat height and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, the hall was silent. Even the laughter stopped. Everyone was waiting to see the spectacle of humiliation that was about to come. John closed his eyes. For an instant, he was no longer in that luxurious hotel surrounded by cruel people. He was back in his 20s in a small conservatory with his teacher whispering in his ear. "Feel the music, John. Don't think about the keys. Feel the music." His hands found the keys as if they had never separated from them. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Victoria. "This is for you," he said, and began to play. The first notes filled the hall like a soft wave. John started with something simple, a melody everyone immediately recognized, but there was something different. Each note was crystal clear, perfect, filled with an emotion no one expected. The hall fell into absolute silence. The laughter stopped, the murmurs ceased, even the waiters stopped with their trays to listen. Victoria felt a chill in her stomach. This wasn't right. The janitor wasn't supposed to be able to play like that. No one expected him to really know music. But John didn't just know music, he was music. His hands danced over the keys with an elegance that brutally contrasted with his simple work uniform. Each movement was precise, controlled, yet full of passion. The simple tune he had started began to transform. John added complex harmonies, variations that revealed a deep knowledge of music theory. What had started as a familiar melody was becoming something unique, something his own. Some guests exchanged worried glances. This wasn't what they expected. This wasn't fun at the expense of a poor soul. This was art. Victoria clenched her fists. How dare that man play that way? How dare he be good at it? People like him shouldn't have talent, shouldn't have dreams, shouldn't be anything but what she said they were. But John kept playing, oblivious to the surprised and uncomfortable looks around him. For him, at that moment, only the music existed, and the music was freeing him from 5 years of silence. John ended the first piece with a soft cadence that echoed through the hall like a sigh. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not mocking expectation, but genuine amazement. He didn't lift his eyes from the piano. Instead, without pausing, he went into a second piece. This time, he chose something more complex, a sonata requiring advanced technique and years of practice to perform correctly. John's fingers flew over the keys with dexterity that mesmerized the audience. Each note was perfect. Each musical phrase told a story. This was not just technical execution, it was high-level interpretation, the kind of performance expected only in the best concert halls worldwide. Victoria felt like the floor was opening beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. The janitor, the man she had humiliated minutes before, was playing with a mastery she had only seen in concerts costing thousands to attend. "Oh my God," whispered one guest, an older woman John recognized as the wife of a famous businessman. "He plays like a virtuoso." The word virtuoso echoed among the guests in low murmurs. Cell phones raised to record humiliation now captured something entirely different. Some guests moved closer to the piano. Drawn by the music like a magnet, John felt every fiber of his being returning to life. It was as if he had been asleep for years and had finally awakened. His hands remembered every movement, every nuance he had learned in another life. The music flowed through him like a river that had been dammed and finally found its way to the sea. He modulated to a more dramatic key, increasing the intensity of the piece. The piano responded to each touch as if it were an extension of his own body. John had forgotten what this feeling was, like the complete connection between musician and instrument when technique becomes invisible and only pure, artistic expression remains. Victoria tried to maintain her composure but felt her legs trembling. She looked around and saw she was not the only one disturbed. The guests were no longer laughing. They were listening, really listening. "Who is this man?" Someone asked quietly. "How can a janitor play like that?" Another whispered. John finished the second piece with a series of powerful chords that reverberated through the hall like distant thunder. This time, when the silence returned, it lasted only a few seconds before being broken by something unexpected. Applause. It started with one person, then two, then half the hall was clapping. It was not polite social event applause, but genuine admiring applause, the kind of ovation given to true artists. John finally lifted his eyes from the piano. His gaze met Victoria's, and she saw something there that made her take a step back. He was no longer the humiliated man from minutes before. He was someone who had found his true identity once more. "Impressive," said an authoritative voice in the crowd. John looked and saw a distinguished man approaching. He recognized the face. It was a famous music critic, someone whose reviews could make or break artistic careers. I haven't heard an interpretation of this quality in years. Victoria felt panic starting to settle. This was completely out of control. What was supposed to be a cruel joke was turning into what exactly? "Where did you study?" asked the critic, addressing John. John hesitated. "These were dangerous waters." Revealing too much of his past would mean explaining why he was working as a janitor when he clearly had talent for much more. "National Conservatory?" he replied simply. A murmur of impression ran through the crowd. The National Conservatory was one of the most prestigious musical institutions in the country. Only the most exceptional talents were accepted there. "And you're working here?" The question came from an elegant woman John didn't recognize. He looked away. Life doesn't always go where you plan it. The answer silenced curiosity momentarily, but John could see minds working around him. People were starting to understand there was much more to his story than it appeared. Victoria regained some composure. She couldn't allow the situation to keep spiraling out of her control. "All right," she said, her voice a little higher than usual. "You know how to play. Congratulations. Now you may return to work." But John didn't move from the piano bench. "I thought you wanted to hear more." "No. Victoria started, but was interrupted by a voice from the crowd. "We want to hear more," shouted someone. "Yes, play another," agreed another. Quickly, a chorus of voices formed, all asking John to continue. Victoria looked around, horrified, realizing she had completely lost control. John smiled for the first time that night. It was not a mocking or triumphant smile, but a smile of pure joy. The smile of someone who had found something they thought was lost forever. "How about something more challenging?" he asked, looking directly at Victoria. She knew she should say no, should end this right there. But with so many people around, all expecting him to continue, she felt cornered. "Do as you wish," she murmured. John nodded and placed his hands on the keys again. This time, he chose one of the most technically complex pieces in the classical repertoire. It was a composition that few pianists in the world could execute perfectly. The first notes came out like raindrops, delicate and precise. Then, like a storm forming on the horizon, the music began to grow in intensity and complexity attacked the most difficult passages with ease. That left even the music critic open-mouthed. His hands moved over the keyboard, as if they were dancing, impossible highs between octaves, scales that rose and fell like roller coasters of sound, chords requiring independent fingers working in different rhythms, simultaneously, all executed with a perfection, bordering on the supernatural. Victoria felt like she was witnessing her own humiliation in slow motion. Every note John played was a slap to her arrogance. Every musical phrase was a reminder of how completely she had underestimated that man. The crowd was completely hypnotized. Some had tears in their eyes, others recorded with their phones, but not to mock, to capture something extraordinary they were witnessing. John reached the climax of the piece, his hands flying over the keys in an explosion of sound and emotion that made the hall's chandelier vibrate slightly. Then, gradually, he brought the music back to calm, finishing with the same delicate raindrops with which he had begun. The silence that followed lasted an eternity, and then the hall exploded, not with laughter, this time but deafening applause. People rose from their seats, clapping with an intensity John hadn't seen in years. "Bravo!" shouted someone. "Extraordinary!" echoed another. Victoria looked around. seeing her social world turning upside down. The man she had called invisible was receiving a standing ovation from the same elite who had laughed at him minutes ago. And worst of all, she had promised to marry him if he played better than a professional. And everyone had heard the promise. The applause still echoed through the hall when John finally stood up from the piano bench. His legs trembled, not from nervousness, but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. It had been so long since he had felt alive, complete himself. Incredible, murmured the music critic, shaking his head in admiration. Simply incredible. How is it possible that talent of this magnitude is... He stopped, realizing the delicacy of the situation. Victoria tried to regain composure, but her hands visibly trembled. She grabbed a champagne glass from a passing tray and drank it in one gulp. She needed time to think, to find a way out of this impossible situation. "Excuse my curiosity," said an elegant lady approaching John, "but I'm sure I've seen you somewhere before." "Your face is familiar." John felt his blood freeze. That was exactly the situation he had been avoiding for 5 years. Being recognized. Having to explain, reliving everything again. "I think you're mistaken." "Ma'am?" he replied politely, starting to walk away from the piano. But the woman didn't give up. No, I'm sure. You used to perform in concerts, didn't you? A few years ago." Her eyes lit up with recognition. "My God, you're John Mitchell, the pianist." A deadly silence spread through the hall. John closed his eyes for a moment. Knowing there was no turning back, his past had caught up with him. "John Mitchell," repeated another guest. "An older man with golden glasses, I remember. You were considered one of the greatest talents of the new generation. You played at the Municipal Theatre when you were only 22. My God, it's true!" exclaimed someone else. "I was there that night. It was extraordinary, but then you just disappeared." John could feel all eyes fixed on him. The same elite that moments ago laughed at his status now looked at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. How had a renowned pianist become a janitor? Victoria felt like she was watching a horror movie. With each revelation, her situation grew worse. He wasn't just a talented janitor. He was a recognized professional musician. Her marriage promise was becoming more real with each second. "Why did you stop playing?" someone from the crowd asked. John looked down. "Even after all these years, it still hurt to talk about it. Some things in life are more important than dreams," he replied simply. But his answer only increased curiosity. People began to move closer, forming a circle around him. John felt like a cornered animal. Then a familiar voice cut through the air. "I remember the story." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Mrs. Marina, the hotel's oldest housekeeper. She had worked there for over 20 years and knew all the secrets, all the stories. John looked at her pleadingly, silently begging her not to reveal everything. But Mrs. Marina had her own reasons to speak. She had seen John humiliated minutes ago and now saw a chance to give him the respect he deserved. "John stopped playing 5 years ago," she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Right after his parents died in a car accident." A murmur of compassion went through the crowd. John closed his eyes, feeling the familiar pain spreading through his chest. "He was an only child," Mrs. Marina continued, "and they had spent everything they had to pay for his music studies. When they died, John discovered the family was full of debts. He sold everything he had, including his piano, to pay creditors. People listened in religious silence. Even Victoria had stopped trying to find an escape and was paying attention to the story. But he could have continued playing, someone said. He could have gotten sponsorship and returned to the stage. Mrs. Marina shook her head. "You don't understand. John didn't stop just because of money. He stopped because music reminded him too much of his parents. Every note he played was a tear for them." John felt tears burning his eyes. After 5 years hearing that story told, it still hurt like the first day. "He came to work here because he needed a job immediately," Mrs. Marina went on. "And because he thought that far from the stage, away from pianos, he could forget. But music is not something you forget. It lives in our souls. Why did you never tell us?" asked the music critic, genuinely moved. John finally found his voice. "Because I didn't want anyone's pity. I just wanted to work in peace and rebuild my life."
"Far from all that. But you wasted 5 years of talent," protested someone. "I didn't waste it," John replied, his voice gaining strength.
"I learned other things. I learned about humility, about dignity in work, about how to treat people. I learned that a person's value is not what they do, but who they are." His words echoed through the hall like a silent reprimand. Many of the people present had never thought about that. To them, employees like John were really invisible. Victoria felt each word as a slap. She had called John invisible. She had said he was born to clean other people's mess and now discovered he was an artist who had sacrificed his dreams for his family. "But why are you playing now?" asked the same lady who had recognized him. John looked directly at Victoria. "Because sometimes life forces us to remember who we really are." The hall remained silent for long seconds. Everyone was processing the story they had just heard. The humiliated janitor had become a tragic and noble figure in everyone's eyes. "Well," said Victoria, trying to regain control of the situation, her voice forced. "It was a very touching story, but now I think you have a promise to keep," interrupted the music critic, his eyes shining with determination. Victoria paled. "What are you talking about? You said you'd marry him if he played better than a professional," replied the man. "And from what we just witnessed, he not only plays better than a professional, he is a professional, one of the best I've ever seen." Murmurs of agreement echoed throughout the hall. Victoria looked around, seeing no allies anywhere. Everyone was on John's side now. "But it was just a joke," she protested. "It didn't seem like a joke at the time," said a voice from the crowd. "You spoke very seriously and in front of everyone," added another. Victoria felt the walls closing in around her. How had she gotten into this situation? How had a simple accident with a champagne glass turned into this nightmare? John watched her silently. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the panic setting in. Part of him felt a dark satisfaction, seeing her face the consequences of her cruelty. But another part, the part that had learned about compassion during these 5 years, felt something different. "Maybe we should clarify the terms of this promise," he said calmly. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised. Victoria, too, with a mixture of hope and distrust in her eyes. "After all," John continued, "marriage is something too serious to be decided by a bet." John's words brought momentary relief to Victoria's face. But this relief lasted only a few seconds. The crowd around didn't seem willing to let the matter die so easily. "No. No, no!" protested the heavy-set businessman who had made bets earlier. "A promise is a promise, especially when made by someone in your position." "Victoria, exactly," agreed an elegant woman. "You can't just back out now." "It would be cowardly." Victoria looked around the hall, seeing the situation was completely out of control. The same guests who minutes ago laughed with her were now pressuring her to fulfill a promise she never imagined she would have to honor. "People, please," she tried to argue, her voice rising an octave. "You can't be serious." "I'm Victoria Collins." "Do you really think I'd marry—" "With what?" John interrupted calmly. "With a janitor? With someone you consider inferior?" The embarrassed silence was deafening. Victoria realized she had fallen into a trap of her own words. "Isn't that right?" she said quickly. "So what? You consider us trash," John completed. His voice was calm but carried wounded dignity. "People born to be invisible, like you said." The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Many of them had employees at home, maids, drivers, gardeners. John's words made them question how they treated those people. Then, someone shouted from the back of the hall. Someone filmed everything. Everyone turned to see a young man with a cell phone in his hand, a mischievous smile on his face. "I posted it on TikTok 5 minutes ago. It already has 1,000 views." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "You did what?" "The guy's performance was amazing. The marriage promise too. It's definitely going viral." Other guests began checking their own phones, and within seconds the hall was filled with exclamations. "It's also on Instagram. Did someone share it on Facebook? My God, it's on Twitter with the hashtag janitor virtuoso." Victoria felt like she was having a nightmare. Her humiliation was being broadcast to the whole world. Within minutes, thousands would be watching the moment she promised to marry John.
100,000 views. Someone shouted, 50,000, 100,000. Guys, this is really going viral. John watched it all with a mix of fascination and concern. He hadn't expected the situation to take this proportion. His intention was only to defend his dignity, not create a media circus. "Victoria," said one of her closest friends, approaching her with a worried expression, "you need to think carefully about this. Your reputation is at stake." "My reputation?" Victoria practically yelled. "My reputation will be destroyed if I marry a janitor." "Your reputation will be destroyed if you go back on your promise," corrected her friend. Imagine the headlines. "Billionaire arrogant, humiliates worker and doesn't keep her word." Do you want to be known as someone who doesn't honor her commitments? John could see the internal struggle happening in Victoria's mind. She was caught between her arrogance and the social consequences of her actions. 200,000 views, announced the young man with the phone. "It's on TV!" Someone who had just received a call shouted. The news channel had picked up the video. Victoria felt her legs weaken. This couldn't be happening. In less than an hour, she had gone from respected hostess to protagonist of a national scandal. "Maybe," said John, his voice cutting through the chaos, "we should have a private conversation." Everyone turned to look at him. Victoria as well, with desperation in her eyes. You would do that?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "I think we've caused enough spectacle for one night," John replied diplomatically. Victoria nodded quickly. Anything was better than continuing to be the center of attention in that humiliating situation. "Very well," said the music critic, clapping to get attention. "How about we give them some privacy to resolve this?" But the crowd didn't seem willing to disperse. Everyone wanted to see how the story would end. 500,000 views. The young man was practically shouting with excitement. "This is history being made. Folks," John extended his hand to Victoria, "let's go." She looked at his hand for a long moment. 5 years ago, she would never have imagined touching a janitor's hand. Now, that hand seemed her only salvation. Hesitantly, she accepted John's hand. The touch was electric, not romantic, but mutual recognition that they were both in an impossible situation. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" John asked. Victoria nodded. "The manager's office is on the second floor." They began walking towards the exit of the hall, but were followed by the curious crowd. John turned to the guests. "Please," he said, with a natural authority that made everyone stop. "Let us resolve this like civilized adults." There were some protests, but eventually people agreed to keep their distance. John and Victoria walked in silence through the hotel's corridors, each lost in their own thoughts. In the elevator, the silence was deafening. Victoria looked at her expensive shoes, unable to find words. John watched the numbers climb, thinking about how his life had completely changed in less than 2 hours. 1 million views, Victoria murmured, looking at her own phone. "My God, 1 million people saw that." John didn't answer. He knew the numbers were the least of his worries at that moment. When they reached the manager's office, Victoria closed the door behind them and leaned against it, as if to create a barrier between themselves and the outside world. Then she said, her voice trembling, "What do we do now?" John sat in one of the armchairs in front of the desk. "That depends. You and me?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "You just destroyed my life, and now you say it depends on me." "I didn't destroy anything," John replied calmly. "I just accepted a challenge you made me. The consequences are a result of your own choices." Victoria moved away from the door and started pacing back and forth across the office. "You don't understand. I have a position to maintain. Shareholders, investors, partners, they expect a certain kind of behavior from me." "What kind of behavior?" John asked. "Humiliating innocent people? No," she protested. "But marrying someone of my social class, someone who understands my world." John watched her for a moment. "What if I told you I understand your world better than you imagine?" Victoria stopped pacing. "What are you talking about?" "Before becoming a janitor, I circulated in those same environments. Charity concerts, gala dinners, high society events. I know those people, Victoria.
And I know exactly what kind of pressure you're feeling now." She looked at him with a new expression, as if seeing him for the first time. "So you know I can't just marry you," she said. "Why not? A scandal, a breach of social protocol. That would be the end of my credibility." She exploded. John took a step toward her. "Or it could be the beginning of something new, a chance to show that you're more than just a spoiled heiress." Victoria retreated, but John kept coming closer, his voice gaining intensity. "You have a choice, Victoria. You can continue being the person who humiliates others to feel superior, or you can become someone who honors her words and treats people with dignity." She stared at him, her eyes shining with tears of anger and frustration. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking," John answered. "I'm asking you to be a better person." The silence in the manager's office was palpable. Victoria and John stared at each other, each processing the words that had been said. Victoria was the first to break the silence. "You really think you know my world?" John nodded. "I know it better than I'd like. And I know behind all this wealth there is a lot of emptiness." "Don't psychoanalyze me," she replied. But there was something in her voice that suggested he had touched a sensitive spot. "I'm not psychoanalyzing. I'm just saying I understand why you act the way you do. When you have everything, it's easy to forget the value of simple people." Victoria turned to the window. "Do you think it's easy carrying the weight of an empire on your shoulders? Making decisions that affect thousands of employees?" "No," John admitted. "But that doesn't justify treating people like they're inferior." "You treated me like that," he continued softly. "Called me invisible. Said I was born to clean other people's mess." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words. "I was angry. You ruined my dress, and that made me less human." She turned to face him, and for the first time that night, John saw something different in her eyes. It was no longer arrogance. It was regret. "No," she admitted quietly. "It didn't make me less human." John approached her. "Victoria, I don't want to force you into anything. I don't want you to marry me out of social pressure." "Then what do you want?" she asked, genuinely confused. "I want you to understand that your words have weight. That all people, regardless of their profession, deserve to be treated with dignity. And if I apologize publicly, would that be enough for you to forget this marriage story?" John shook his head. "It's not just about me, Victoria. It's about what kind of person you want to be." "I don't know what kind of person I want to be," she exploded, her composure breaking. "I've spent my whole life being what others expected. The perfect heiress, the ruthless businesswoman." Tears began streaming down her face. "Do you think it's easy to be me? To wake up every day knowing hundreds of people depend on my decisions?" John felt something move in his chest. For the first time, he was seeing the real Victoria, a scared and overwhelmed woman. "No," he said softly. "It mustn't be easy. And now I have to deal with the fact that I sinned against an innocent person because I was having a bad day." "Everyone deserves a second chance," John said. "I don't deserve it," she cried. "I humiliated you in front of all those people." John watched her, seeing genuine pain in her eyes. "And now you know how wrong that is. Knowing doesn't change what I did." "No. But it can change what you do from now on." Victoria sat heavily in the chair. "What do I do now, John?" John approached her. "That depends. Do you want to grow from this situation? I'm talking about using this as an opportunity, a chance to become the person you have the potential to be. And what person is that? Someone who uses her power to make a difference, who treats people with respect, who understands that true greatness comes from lifting others up, not humiliating them." Victoria was silent, processing his words. "And what about the promise I made?" John smiled. "How about we make a deal?" "What kind of deal?" "Marriage shouldn't be the result of a bet. How about honoring your promise differently? Help me get back to music. Give me a chance to rebuild my career." Victoria looked at him, surprised. "You'd give up on the marriage?" "Marriage was never the goal," John explained. "The goal was dignity, respect, a chance to start over. And in return, you learn about humility, empathy. Think of it as an intensive humanity course." Victoria couldn't help smiling. Taught by my personal teacher. Exactly. Victoria stood and extended her hand. Professor John. I accept your terms, John shook her hand, feeling that something had changed between them. Let's go back and explain our decision? Let's, she agreed. But first, let me fix this makeup. A student must perform properly. For the first time in 5 years, John felt hope. Hope to return to music, to make a difference that an impossible person could transform. Ready? He asked. Ready, she answered. Together, they walked to face the world.